morning, everyone. I am very pleased to chair this special meeting of the Animal Welfare Intergroup on the welfare of broiler chickens. Once again, in the form of a 2-hour webinar to maximize the time we have for panel discussion. We have a wide range of stakeholders attending today, clearly showing the relevance of broiler welfare for industry, for researchers, policymakers, and NGOs alike. A warm welcome to you all. Before we start, I would like to share our housekeeping rules. This event is streamed live at Facebook, and we are also recording this session. The recording, presentations, and list of participants will be published on the Animal Welfare Intergroup website after this event. Interpretation is unfortunately not available, so this webinar is completely in English. All questions and comments should therefore be addressed in English so everybody can understand. Please keep yourself muted during the meeting unless you are given the floor by Reineke or myself. And you can add your questions using the Q&A function. If you are a member of the Intergroup and wish to intervene, please let us know by using the chat box, which will be moderated by Reineke, the president of the Intergroup for Animals. Our webinar today coincides with the launch of the scientific report by Intergroup for Animals called The Welfare of Broiler Chickens in the EU, From Science to Action. And this report, which I hope you all received, was co-authored by 6 experts in the field, 5 of whom are here today to contribute to the discussion. Dr. Leoni could not join us today, unfortunately, due to the time zone difference, but we would like to thank her for her contribution as well. This new report explains the main animal welfare challenges for broiler chickens throughout their life, including aspects that are not covered by EU legislation, such as the welfare of parent birds and newly born chicks in hatcheries. And it points towards concrete solutions, which is what matters the most. The solutions are not theoretical, they are concrete. And today we have the opportunity to not only hear from the experts, but also to see for ourselves how these solutions can be applied in practice. I should add that this topic is very close to my heart. I have been the initiator of the EP resolution on animal welfare, antimicrobial use, and the environmental impact of industrial broiler farming in 2018. And last year, I hosted an event on the welfare of broiler parent birds in 2019. So I'm glad to see you all here today. 7.4 billion broiler chickens. 7.4 billion. I still can't believe the numbers we hear. I'm 7.4 billion animals slaughtered in the EU in 2018, and every time I check these numbers, as you noticed, I noticed they have gone up, and I can't believe it. We are not doing right to these by these animals. If we exclude organic farming and some higher welfare and freedom systems, such as the label rouge, we have to imagine billions of social, curious, and intelligent birds who are reared under intensive conditions with very few possibilities to enjoy good welfare, let alone experience a good life. It is time for a change. Time for us to incorporate science and good practice into new and updated legislation. The coming years offer a very important window of opportunity for us MEPs to accelerate such a change. And with this, I'm referring to the own initiative report on the farm to fork strategy, where I we can push for the highest welfare standards to be incorporated in updated legislation, not only on broiler chicken welfare, but of course also on the welfare of all other species. It goes without saying that we should also ensure that imports of animal products from outside the EU, including chicken, respect our animal welfare standards. And I'm very honored that we are able to hear from experts today what the needs are for these animals and what needs to be done to extract and enact this change. I'm sorry, I can't read my own text anymore. It is my pleasure to now introduce the first speaker of today, Dr. Ingrid de Jong. Dr. de Jong is Senior Animal Welfare Scientist at Wageningen University and Research, and she coordinates research projects related to the welfare of broilers, broiler breeders and laying hens for the EU, national governments and private companies. And Dr. de Jong has published over 55 scientific papers, in addition to various book chapters, conference papers, and reports, and has been an invited speaker on various international conferences on animal welfare. She will give a presentation about the characteristics of welfare-friendly broiler chicken production. Dr. de Jong, the floor is yours for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. I will first share my screen. So a quick check whether you can see my presentation in the presentation mode. Yes, if I don't hear anything, I suppose it's okay. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present some aspects of welfare-friendly broiler chicken production. In my presentation, I will explain some aspects of these systems which do already exist and how the various aspects of these systems affect broiler welfare. First of all, I would like to draw your attention to some developments in higher welfare broiler production systems, because there is a trend towards an increase in these systems, especially an increase in what we call the so-called middle segment systems, which are in between organic with outdoor range, very low stocking densities, and the conventional system. And here, if we speak in my presentation, if I speak about the conventional system, I mean an indoor systems with broiler chickens that are fast growing and housed at relatively high stocking densities. Examples of these middle segment systems are, for example, RSPCA assured, but also developments in other countries like the Tyrol in Germany, in Denmark, the Danish Harch, or the Better Life and Chicken of Tomorrow in the Netherlands. Another interesting development is the European Chicken Commitment. And we know that many food businesses and also retailers have committed themselves to the European Chicken Commitment, which means that in the next years we can expect an increase in what we call the so-called middle segment systems for broiler chickens. There's not an official definition of a welfare-friendly or a high welfare broiler production system, but here we define it as a system which is using a slow or slower growing broiler breed, and I will tell a bit more about it in my next slides. Further, these systems have a lower stocking density as compared to the conventional system. Here we say they have a stocking density of 38 kilos per square meter or lower, and usually stocking densities like 33, 30 or 25 kilos per square meter are also present in these systems. They use environmental enrichment, of which are bales and wheat scattering most common, and they usually have a longer uninterrupted dark period of at least 6 hours. In addition to that, there are some systems that do have natural light entrance in the house, either by windows in the roof or in the walls, and there are systems that have a veranda, so a covered range, or a real outdoor range. So from these characteristics, you may understand that there is quite a variation in these welfare-friendly broiler production systems, but they do have some aspects in common. First of all, I would like to say something about slow or slower growing broiler breeds. How do we define a slower or slow-growing broiler breed? We define it as a chicken from a slower-growing female breeder and a fast or slower-growing male breeder. And these usually have a growth rate of about 50 grams per day or lower. And this also depends, of course, on the diet which is provided in these systems. They reach a slaughter weight in about 49 days or longer, as opposed to between 35 and 42 days in general for the conventional fast-growing birds. But you understand also from this that within these breeds, there are large differences in growth rate. Recently, there were some studies that compared the welfare of these slower-growing broiler breeds with the welfare of fast-growing breeds, where these were housed under similar conditions. So they had all the same housing and management conditions. And these studies showed that slower-growing breeds had better locomotion. They also have better hookburn and footpad dermatitis scores, which means a lower prevalence, and also have cleaner feathers. And these are examples of broiler welfare indicators which are important and actually should be monitored in practice to say something about broiler welfare. In addition to that, the studies also showed that slower growing breeds are generally more active, especially in the second half of the rearing period, and they make more use of environmental enrichments. And some of these studies also showed that slower growing breeds had a lower prevalence of breast myopathies. Breast myopathies are abnormal consistencies of the breast meat, which leads to economic unfavorable condition as these cannot be sold. And sometimes it's also suggested that these involve a welfare problem for the chickens. Finally, which is not mentioned in this slide, there are also welfare advantages for the parent stock of these breeds, as the female broiler breeders do not have to be restricted in their feed or are much less restricted as compared to conventional broiler breeders. What can we say about the welfare performance of the welfare-friendly broiler systems? As I already explained, because these involve quite some different aspects like the breed, the stocking density, enrichment, etc. As I explained in my one of the first slides, these systems vary in the input variables. So these systems also vary in the degree to which broiler welfare is met. And we should keep in mind that these systems do not per se guarantee broiler welfare, but they have the potential to provide better welfare as compared to the conventional indoor system with fast-growing birds at a high stocking density. And of course, we should also keep in mind that welfare is not only caused by input variables, but also by the management of the farmer, which may also cause variation in the extent to which welfare is actually met in these higher welfare broiler systems. Unfortunately, at this moment, there is very little scientific information on the welfare performance of broilers in higher welfare systems in commercial practice. We do have some existing data, but sometimes these are relatively old or only involve a comparison of a limited number of flocks. However, we do have some data, and these generally indicate a better welfare in these systems. And I just show you one example here, which is also included in the report of the Intergroup. This graph shows the proportion of bird with moderate to severe skate scores, which means the proportion of bird with locomotion difficulties. The blue bars indicate the proportion of birds in the conventional flocks in several studies, and the orange bars indicate the proportion of birds in higher welfare systems. And as you can see here, there's quite some variation, both in the higher welfare and conventional systems, in the proportion of birds with locomotion problems. But you can also see that clearly the prevalence of these locomotion problems is much lower in the higher welfare systems. And this is just one example. Another interesting aspect may that in this system, there is a reduction in the use of antibiotics. In this graph, I show the antibiotic usage in the Netherlands from 2014 to 2019, which are for both slower growing broiler chicken flocks, so the various systems that exist, and the conventional flocks with fast growing birds. And I show both the proportion of flocks without antibiotics and the standardized daily dosage, annual daily dosage of antibiotics. And what you can see here is that in general, there is a much lower use of antibiotics in the systems with slower growing broilers. Of course, with these higher welfare systems, costs are involved. But we should also keep in mind that you can already have a significant increase in the welfare with a middle segment system, which can be applied in existing buildings with a relatively small increase in costs. And I will explain the figure, which is included on the slide. On the x-axis, you see the modeled cost in euro cents per kilogram live weight, and on the y-axis, you see the welfare score of the different systems. And here you see the modeled welfare score for the conventional system in the Netherlands in this case, and here you see the welfare scores of two middle segment systems that can be applied in existing buildings, and you see one other high welfare system that involves a covered veranda. What you can see is that with a relatively, small increase in costs, you already have a significant increase in broiler welfare. And we should also say that there are market opportunities for premium prices, and we do have some examples from European countries, of course. Finally, I would like to say something about welfare and sustainability. First, we should keep in mind that sustainability is a multifaceted concept, which includes animal welfare. Environmental sustainability of higher welfare broiler production is topic of discussion. There are only a few published studies, but these indicate a negative effect of these systems on environmental sustainability. And that's because, of course, we do have a lower stocking density, a higher land use, and a less efficient feed conversion. However, innovations can improve this environmental sustainability, and a good example is the windstake, which we will hear later on in this meeting, which has some advantages with respect to energy use, but you can also think of the use of byproducts, so non-human consumable products for the diet for the chickens. But research is required, both to further study the environmental impact, as well as to work towards possible solutions. To conclude this short presentation, I would like to indicate that the existing higher welfare broiler production systems in the EU are examples how broiler welfare can be improved under commercial conditions. And even in existing houses, like for many of these middle segment systems, welfare can significantly be increased by the use of slower growing broiler strains, reducing the stocking density and providing, for example, environmental enrichment. Of course, costs are involved, but there are also market opportunities, and we have some recent examples in Europe. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. de Jong, for this very interesting presentation. Because of the time, we will immediately go to our next speaker. But before that, I would like to give the floor to one of my colleagues, Ms. Manuela Ripa, who has an urgent question and she has to leave sooner. So, Manuela, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Anja. And it's more a comment than a question. And thank you for just giving me the floor. I mean, I will attend a little bit, but it's true that I have to leave afterwards. As this week is the World Antimicrobial Awareness Week, that is why, together with several of my colleagues, I addressed a letter to the Commissioner for Health and the Commissioner for Agriculture, urging the European Commission to enact the necessary changes in livestock farming so that we can meet the EU ban on the routine prevention use of antimicrobials. What we will hear today and the result of this new scientific report really reinforce my convictions in the broiler sector, as in other sectors. To put a health-oriented approach in place, we must move away from the genetic selection for fast growth, limit maximum stocking densities, enable the animals to perform positive natural behaviors. I know that the European Commission is attending this meeting, and I really hope that they will listen to the scientists and read this new report. We need fundamental change. And we need it urgently if we really want to protect public health while also improving animal welfare. And clearly the two aspects are profoundly interconnected. So thank you for letting me do this comment, and I'm very much looking forward to hear the other presentations. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Manuela, for this comment, and thank you for your work on antimicrobial resistance as well. It's very important that we address this topic. Our next speaker is Professor Niamh O'Connell from Queen's University Belfast, where she is Professor on Animal Behavior and Welfare at the School of Biological Sciences. And her research spans broiler chickens, laying hens, pigs, and cattle, and she published over 70 peer-reviewed papers in the field of animal welfare. A key focus for her and her team is to work with companies to refine housing and management practices, for instance, by developing birds-directed environmental enrichment strategies for broiler chickens. Her research had a direct impact on farm practice in the United Kingdom. And she will give a presentation today on designing the right environment for broiler chickens during the rearing phase. Professor O'Connell, the floor is yours for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. I will just share my screen. Can I check that you can see that okay? Is that in the right display settings?
Yes, yes, but if you can start your presentation, please.
Yes, sure. Thank you very much for the invitation today. As we said, I'm going to talk about designing the right environments for broiler chickens, an area that we've been researching for a number of years together with my colleague Mary Baxter, pictured here. When people talk about broiler production systems, they're often viewed as being quite uniform in nature, but as has been discussed, they're actually quite variable in reality, and they vary from traditional intensive systems, which we see here with fast-growing birds at quite high stocking densities that are confined across the production system, to free-range systems where we tend to use slower-growing birds with access to outdoor space. And as has been mentioned, in the middle we have this myriad of enhanced indoor systems where we see different levels of access to environmental enrichment and space to meet different retailer and quality assurance requirements for high welfare. The majority of chickens come from the traditional conventional and intensive systems in the top left-hand picture, and that's really the focus of
Professor O'Connell, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but we can't see your presentation. It seems that it's blocked. So we can see your screen, but the presentation is not running.
Is that clear now?
Yes, yes, very good. Thank you.
Okay. So as I've said, we have a range of production systems, including this myriad that have been referred to before of this enhanced indoor systems. But the majority of our chicken meat comes from the conventional intensive systems, and that's really the focus of my presentation today. We've talked about fast growth rates, and certainly our modern broiler chickens have come a long way from their ancestral roots. And the fast production systems that we see, the fast growth rate, has been associated with some health issues, as has been mentioned, in particular leg health issues. But a key problem that we also see is quite high levels of inactivity in these birds, particularly when they get towards the end of the production cycle. And this is a problem for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it can exacerbate the leg health issues. And secondly, it means that the birds just aren't showing their full behavioral repertoire, their natural repertoire of behaviors. While growth and while genetics is important, it's not the only factor. Even with faster growing birds, they are still motivated to perform natural behaviors like perching, exploring, playing. They just need the opportunity to do it. And that's really the focus of my talk today, is to say that genetics is important, but so is their environment. And we need to provide the right stimulation to promote this behavior and to facilitate it. And the key aspects of the environment that are important in this respect are light, space, and the presence of environmental enrichment options. And I'll just quickly talk about some of the research in this area. So starting with light, we can see the provisions in the current directive at the moment, and they talk about light intensity and also photoperiod. There is some research which suggests that perhaps we need to think about photoperiod and that longer, darker periods might be appropriate, but I think more research is needed in this field, in particular in looking at the appropriate photoperiod for different ages of birds within commercial systems. But the quality of the light is also really important. Chickens have evolved under conditions of natural light, which differs from artificial light in terms of the intensity of the light provided and also the wavelengths. And chickens see further into the ultraviolet than we do, and it's thought that a combination of low light intensity and lack of ultraviolet wavelengths under artificial light may be contributing to the low activity levels. And it's possible that the birds actually can't perceive their environments clearly under the conditions of artificial light. And this would suggest that if we give them access to natural light, it will improve their welfare. And in fact, this is supported by research. So we have done trials and others as well, where we've looked at the effect of providing natural light through windows in broiler houses. And we found that when this happens in commercial houses, we see increased bird activity, improved leg health, improved litter quality with no adverse effects on performance. So this research is really helping to underpin an increased industry move towards using windows in broiler houses. When we look at space, again, we can see the text from the directive there. And the key point is that broiler chickens can be stocked up to 42 kilograms per meter squared, provided certain conditions are met. Again, we've talked about the potential concerns about these high stocking densities, but they can affect welfare in a number of ways. It can create difficulty in the birds dissipating heat, and which can create or can contribute to heat stress. It can reduce the litter quality, which can contribute to leg health problems, and it can physically restrict movement. And again, this means the birds don't get to express their natural behaviors and can also contribute to reduced leg health. If we look to some of the larger trials that have been conducted on commercial farms in relation to stocking density, and particularly the trial by Marion Dawkins, that involved 2.7 million birds, and that investigated 5 different target stocking densities, and certainly towards the higher end of these target stocking densities, and including the level that we currently are permitted to stock up to, we can see that as you increase stocking density, the percentage of birds with a good gait score declines, so indicating that leg health declines. As expected, jostling between the birds increases, and growth rate declines. And certainly we also have other evidence from commercial trials that increasing stocking density is a risk factor for reduced welfare, and is something that really needs to be considered as we move forward. Finally, moving on to environmental enrichment items, these are obviously key in enabling the birds to perform their natural species-specific behaviors, which is important to consumers. It's not mentioned in the current directive. There's no provision for environmental enrichment, unlike in the pigs directive. But certainly the industry in many cases, as we've heard, have moved forward already and sometimes include environmental enrichment as part of their own schemes. And we have a strong scientific evidence base now showing the welfare benefits of providing different types of environmental enrichment. And I'll just finish off by giving some examples. For example, perching for birds, even though they don't need to do it anymore, housed birds and chickens are strongly motivated to seek an elevated place to perch to gain some height. We've shown in research that for faster growing birds, they strongly prefer to perch on platforms, like you can see in the picture here, rather than on bars. It suits their conformation better. And when we provide them with platforms in commercial houses, they're used at a very high level. And this suggests that they're good for the bird. They improve their welfare. The birds are choosing to use them. But we also see broader benefits in terms of reduced avoidance behavior, indicating that when they have perches in the houses, they're generally less fearful. And others have shown improvements in leg health and increases in comfort behavior. So there's a strong evidence base to suggest that perches improve the welfare of our commercial broiler chickens. Foraging and exploratory items are often included in industry initiatives. They can include things like chains that you can see in the top picture here. And again, we know from research on commercial farms that the chickens actually engage with this type of enrichment quite well. They show an interest in them and therefore they seem to have a value, but they don't appear to lead to strong, consistent benefits in terms of overall activity levels or leg health. Straw bales, certainly they interact very well with this type of enrichment. They dismantle these bales very effectively across the production cycle. They also cluster around them, which suggests that they offer some perceived protection and shelter. And as they're dismantling the bales, they improve the litter quality, and they're sometimes also used as perches. So that there's multiple benefits, and they really do seem to be good candidates for effective environmental enrichment regimes. Finally, another type of enrichment, which perhaps isn't as common in industry initiatives at the moment, but research work is showing is really promising in meeting the needs of these birds, is the use of appropriate dust bathing material. So this is just some pictures from trial work on commercial farms where we've looked at dust bathing material like peat, just as a control, a positive control for experimental purposes, and also byproducts like oat husks, which you can see in this ring here. And when you provide this type of dust bathing material, the birds engage really, really well with it. And they show strong preferences for dust bathing in appropriate material like this, and prefer it to dust bathing in conventional litter in the house. And what's interesting is that they actually show an increase in this type of behavior as they get older. So while normal general activity declines, dust bathing behavior actually increases. And what Mary Baxter has shown in her research is that this increased activity actually contributes to an improved gait score in commercial houses when they're provided with dust bathing material like this. So again, another strong candidate for good environmental enrichment. So just to conclude, chickens are naturally active and inquisitive. And I think that's very clear. And we need to give them the opportunities to express these traits within housed systems. What the evidence would show is that welfare is affected not only by the amount of space they have, but what's critical is also the quality of that space. And things that contribute to that quality include access to natural light and presence of appropriate environmental enrichment. And these have been scientifically demonstrated to improve welfare without compromising performance in commercial systems. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Professor O'Connell, for this excellent presentation. After contributing to the reports that we are launching today, we asked the scientists to express their views on the future of broiler rearing and how it should be like in the EU if we all take the needs of the animals into account. They responded enthusiastically to this challenge, and I would like now to give the floor to Professor Christine Nicol, who will paint this picture for us. Professor Nicol graduated from the University of Oxford with a first-class degree in zoology and holds a PhD on the welfare of laying hens. She is currently a professor of animal welfare in the Royal Veterinary College in the University of London. She has been awarded several awards, among which the University's Federation on Animal Welfare Medal for Outstanding Achievement in Animal Welfare Sciences. Professor Nicol, the floor is yours for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me. And thank you for this opportunity to speak to the vision document. It was an unusual experience for us as scientists to be asked to think in this way, rather than contributing to a conventional scientific opinion. And in some ways, it was quite liberating. It allowed us to step outside of our usual boxes to consider the longer term picture during a very challenging time. We were asked to consider what would an ideal future broiler rearing system look like if all welfare requirements of the animals were taken into account. And note the focus here on the animals' welfare. We were free for once to consider welfare as a central issue, rather than a minor component of a system designed and dominated by economies of scale. Different answers were provided by each scientist, and so the document is an amalgam of ideas, but some common threads emerged. First, And in line with the views of a majority of EU citizens, we would like to see welfare taking a central place in decisions about the direction of future farming. We are not naive, and we recognise that farms exist to make a profit and that people need safe, healthy and affordable food, and that the impacts of farming on the environment must be taken into account. However, by farming sentient creatures, we take on a duty to eliminate negative experiences, such as pain or chronic frustration, from our farming systems, and this, we believe, should be non-negotiable. There has been, as we've heard this morning, a real shift in recent years towards breeding and rearing healthier and more robust strains of chickens. Objective audits to establish which breeds are truly robust are being undertaken by third parties to inform assurance schemes, retailers and consumers, and interest in these breeds looks set to grow in the next few years. Broiler producer organisations are also conducting careful and objective audits of bird welfare. And all of these moves are to be welcomed, but they need to be further encouraged through changes in incentives and strategic directions and regulations. But our vision goes further. It encompasses the idea that truly good welfare is about more than just avoiding the worst possible outcomes. During their short lives, broiler chickens should also have the opportunity to experience positive events. Our vision is not prescriptive or outlandish. It simply notes that birds enjoy the opportunity to engage in behaviours that matter. As Niamh has said, foraging, dust bathing and perching. The provision of enrichments, though, not only allows for these behaviours, but it provides synergistic benefits. And this is a point I really want to emphasise. When you give birds the types of enrichment that Niamh outlined, it enables them to learn to use their brains. They gain a degree of agency or control over their environment. And we know that these, if you like, meta effects are factors that increase resilience to stress. Another thing that I have learned in 30 years of studying chickens, or I hate to say, I think even more than 30 years of studying chickens, is that they have individual preferences. Even birds that all look the same have subtly different tolerances for light, temperature, how close they want to be to other birds. And again, a degree of enrichment, the straw bales, the natural light, enables those individuals within very large flocks to find their own best conditions. Our vision looks forward. It doesn't look back to some idealized golden era. Looking forwards, we accept that it should be possible to provide extremely good welfare within very large houses. And we are in favour of automated solutions to monitoring birds to survey their health and detect the earliest possible signs of emerging problems. Tremendous technological advances mean that farm-side detection and diagnosis of disease will become increasingly possible. Automated vision or sound systems are being designed using machine learning so that problems from equipment failure to an individual bird overheating will be identified almost instantaneously so that appropriate and rapid corrective steps can be taken. But automation will not completely replace the role of the farmer or stock person who must interpret these automated inputs alongside his or her knowledge. And increasingly, these new skills should result in increased pride in the farming role and increased confidence for consumers. Even slower growing breeds of broiler chickens live for only a few weeks before slaughter, and this aspect requires much greater attention. The proportion of broilers in the European Union that are now killed after stunning in a controlled atmosphere system has risen in recent years, and this is to be welcomed. Under this system, birds are stunned in the crates. They do not have to experience being unloaded, inverted, shackled and stunned using an electric water bath. So the process is far less stressful with less risk of an ineffective stun. So I ask you, as you consider the whole chain of broiler production, from the parent birds to the newly hatched chicks and the eventual slaughter process, I ask you to consider that welfare does not become relegated to the sidelines. Funding for visionary research programs and the engagement of citizens and producers in strategic decision-making will stimulate the development of new systems and practices designed to ensure good lives and humane deaths for the chickens that we eat. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you so much for giving us this vivid picture of how a broiler system could look like and what we can do to make sure that the needs of broiler chickens are met in future rearing systems for as long as we need to rear animals for food. I think we have a couple of questions, but I will go over to Reineke to see if there are questions right now. Otherwise, I have a question for our panelists as well.
Thank you, Anja. And so far, I think everyone was just very impressed by this vision, including myself. And maybe I can start the discussion a bit by asking Professor Nicole, you have drafted this vision. Do you have a sort of timeline in mind? When do you think this could become a reality? And also, what would be needed from the EU institutions in terms of regulatory support or financial support? And I totally understand this is beyond your scope, but yeah, we won't pin you down on it. But it would be very interesting to hear if you have a view on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really going to be stepping outside of my comfort zone a little bit here. But in terms of timelines, I think that although we see these very positive moves towards the slower growing breeds and the assurance schemes, we do have to recognise that currently the vast majority of production in the EU is still in the conventional systems. And we have to recognise that farmers have invested in these systems. They have learnt how to manage birds using these very efficient technical systems established close to the abattoirs and integrated and efficient. And I think it would be naive to think that this can be changed overnight. But I think there are huge factors that are going to drive change in the way that we think about how chickens are reared over the next, I would say, 10 to 20 years. And one of those factors is the rise in plant-based alternatives. Now, chicken production is one of the most efficient forms of livestock farming. When you compare it with beef farming or any other form of meat production, chicken farming is incredibly efficient. However, it's not as efficient as plant-based protein. And so the question arises, where is the broiler sector going to go? Is it going to try to become even more efficient to compete with plant-based alternatives? Or is it going to step back and say the need for very cheap protein is more likely to be met by plant-based alternatives, therefore opening up a window for broiler production to become something more like we present in the vision here? This drive towards plant-based eating, with heavy investment from, in fact, many animal-based protein companies. Tyson Foods in the United States is investing very heavily in plant-based production. It opens up a space for the higher welfare broiler production that we advocate. I can't see this. I think what we need for it to happen in the next 10 to 20 years is for steps to be taken now. We can't wait 10 years and then take some steps. We have to put in place the regulatory environment, the incentive environment now that's going to allow for that transition. But I think it should be seen in the broader context of how we consider environmental sustainability, consumer changes and transitions, How we do it, I think that is a question for somebody else.
Yeah, and that somebody else is also present today because, you know, the moment to discuss this transition couldn't be better than today. The EU has launched its ambitions on the EU Green Deal, the Farm to Fork strategy, and what you just described, but the entire vision you presented also perfectly fits within that debate. I'm looking at MEP Francesco Guerrero. What do you think, Francesco, about the vision presented by Professor Nicole, and how do you see this materializing in the future?
Hello, good morning. Thanks for the presentation to all speakers. Well, it was very clear. I also support this vision. For me, it's clear that a strong movement of a plant-based industry and the wishes of the EU citizens will drive these changes, but also as legislators, we should incentivize these industries to shift not only to more animal welfare standards, better animal welfare standards, but also if they want, and I think that is a very interesting way to go, to shift to another types of products, mainly vegetable products. I have a question. I don't know if it's to Christine, but I will make it to all the speakers. It's very quick. We often hear that there is a tension, a conflict between what is economical viable in the poultry industry and what is best for animal welfare. Going what about was said by Heineke. However, we have seen that electrical stunning in many cases causes unnecessary suffering to the animals. So I would wondering what are your recommendations for alternatives that we as MEPs obviously should push for instead of electrical stunning. If it's possible, what is the way that we should push forward?
Professor Nicole, are you comfortable with taking this question? No, I'm looking at Ingrid de Jong. I think this question could be relevant for you. Are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Yeah, it's about stunning, right? So I was just thinking whether Marien Gerritsen could maybe answer this question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also about, you know, how to reconcile animal welfare and economic viability aspects. But let us first discuss the slaughter aspect. Marian, are you with us? I don't know. Otherwise, Francesco.
Yes, I am
yeah,
here.
I see something moving.
Yeah, it takes some time to unmute and to start the video.
Yeah, no worries.
Well, about the broiler's last day of life, as one of my former colleagues called it, it's really a day full of risk factors, and it starts on the farm with preparing animals for transport to the slaughterhouse for the catching and crating. So at that level, you have a lot of injuries and fear in animals, and that will go on until stunning at the slaughter plant. In case you have to handle animals at the slaughter plant again, so uncrating them and shackling them for electrical stunning, you have an additional animal welfare risk. So that's why, in my opinion, it would be better to avoid handling of animals or human-animal interactions as much as possible, stun the animals in crates or in containers or in the transport system by using gas stunning systems. And I think there are systems available on the market in different price levels for stunning animals in containers and crates. And I think a lot of development is still going on in steps in gas concentrations and in avoiding aversive situations during stunning. So I think a lot of effort is made and available in better treatment of animals at slaughter.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gerritsen, and we can come back to this topic also later at the end. I would like to invite MEP Niels Fuglsang to take the floor. Niels, you also have a question to Professor Nicole?
Thank you so much, Reineke. I think maybe it's actually for Ingrid de Jong, but whoever would like to answer is fine with me. So my question is, we know that EU citizens, they want the EU to increase animal welfare for broiler chickens, and we know from the presentations today that it's actually possible, and from the report from Intergroup for Animals that was launched today, that it's possible to increase the welfare for broiler chicken. And we heard, of course, a lot of advantages for the animals in doing so. Perhaps it would be interesting if Ingrid or some of the other speakers could elaborate on what the advantages could be for the society as a whole to increase the animal welfare for broiler chickens. Could you point at any advantages for the society as a whole and for the farmers as well? Because the farmers are, of course, important here. I suppose they have fast growing breeds because it economically pays off. But having slower growing breeds, would there be any advantages for the farmers and for the society as a whole? I would like to ask if you could elaborate on that. Thank you.
Shall I take it first, and then maybe someone else from the panel?
Very good. Take it away.
Yes, maybe just to start with the final one, the advantage for farmers. I think if you work in a system which is more robust with respect to for example, bird health as well, it may give a lot of might give more pleasure to farmers to manage these birds. And of course, there is no, I don't have any scientific background which underpins my opinion in this, but of course we have, I have spoken to farmers having these, working with these high welfare systems, and most of them indicate that it really gives them pleasure to work with birds which are much more active, but also have a reduced risk of welfare problems. So I think for a farmer it can be a very nice transition to switch to these types of systems. So it can have advantages for them, clearly. And of course, a farmer doesn't like to have any ill birds or to find any dead birds in his house. That's also for a farmer, it's something he doesn't want. So if you have a system with a low risk for disease and mortality, for example, which is also the case in most of these high welfare systems, yeah, I think it gives a lot of more pleasure to the work for the farmers. So, and maybe somebody else would like to comment further on that.
Thank you, Dr. de Jong, for this explanation. I think we need to move on in the program, Anja. We still have lots of questions. We do have time for more debate towards the end. I would also like to encourage everyone, do post your questions in the Q&A. The experts are also responding in the Q&A. So Anja, what are we going to do next?
Well, thank you, Reineke. Yes, our next presentation and final presentation for today is a virtual visit to the Windstreek farm in the Netherlands, led by Robert Nijkamp, the owner. Windstreek is a broiler farm with 1-star Better Life of the Dutch animal protection organization Dierenbescherming. And it also won the 2016 Food Innovation Award of Compassion in World Farming. And we hope that technology will assist us, as this is a live connection with the farm. But just in case it wouldn't work, we have plan B, but I keep my fingers crossed and hope it will not be necessary. So let's go over to the Windstreek farm, and Robert, you are now live.
All right. You can start speaking. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Robert. Hi. My name is Robert Nijkamp. I'm a poultry farmer here in the Netherlands. And right now we are located in my Windstreek house. And thank you for the invitation. And I like to show you my house for the next upcoming 10 minutes. It's a virtual tour because of all the rules and legislations and requirements. We cannot go and have everybody into the house, which is very sad, because it's very nice to stay into the house and look and feel, and especially feel the circumstances and how it works over here. But I will try it for you for the next few minutes. And as you can see, we are into the broiler house. The broilers right now are 10 days old. And maybe you can see something in the background. The house has a totally different shape as we do have here, as a traditional house. And the shape is mainly because we use natural ventilation in this house, which means that we have a very high part in the house and a very low part, so we can have enough ventilation during warm and hot days and big birds. But right now, as I said, they are 10 days old. And as you can see, there are some broilers over here. Not very much, but that's because we have different areas into the house. As you can see right now, we are close to the brooders, and that's the part where the broilers start their life. When they come just out of the eggs and they arrive at the farm, they come into the brooders, we put them into, and this is their safe haven. As you can see, we have water and feed in there, and this is the place where the heat is in. This is an infrared heating brooder, and we try to copy the mother hen with a small safe haven, which is warm, which has water, which has feed, so they can always rely on this part of the farm, this part of the house. And as you can see from off day one, they have the possibility to pop out of the brooder and explore the rest of the house. And it's very important that the broilers can always choose their own place where they like to be, where they like to sit, where they like to play, sleep, looking for feed, etc., etc. You see right now, a lot of birds are, although they are only 10 days old, are going outside the brooders. And usually they have a temperature in the house, for example, and under the brooders for 28 degrees. Into the house, it's now 20, 21 degrees. But still they are going outside, exploring the exploring area. And after a few minutes, they go back, or they like to rest. But that's what they do: explore, rest, and take their own behavior. The brooders is the part where we start. It's the only place into the house where which is heated up. In a traditional house, you heat up the whole house to 35, 36 degrees. But we do only here with brooders. And it's an electric infrared panel. And if we talk about sustainability, all the electricity we need for this heating part, we produce ourselves by solar panels. So we can say for energy consumption, if you take the combination of natural ventilation and electric heating powered by our own solar panels, we don't use any carbon dioxide for production, for heating or ventilation. Very important for us. Because we use these brooders and we don't have to heat up the whole house, if I compare it to my other traditional houses, we can save up to 75% in energy consumption with this house. Very unique, just because specific heating place of the house. As you can see, broilers like to be around the brooders. They pop up, they pop out, and go everywhere they like, and they start exploring. And they explore a little bit when they're young, for example, like they are now. And during their life, they explore more of the house, and they use more of the foraging area and other areas into our house. We also have some platforms over here they can use. And I think it's better we walk slowly to the other part, to the exploring area for the birds from of the brooders. So you can see we are walking to a big daylight wall with a lot of daylight coming into the house. It's easier for the broilers to explore natural behavior. And because of the daylight, we have a daylight gradient into the house. Close to the brooders, there's a little bit more shade, and close to the wall, there's much more daylight, so they can choose wherever they like to sit or play or rest. And not only the daylight has a gradient, we also have the same with the temperature. And that combination makes that sometimes, especially when climatic circumstances outside are very good, a lot of broilers are located in the exploring area, and sometimes only a few. And that mainly depends on climatic circumstances. And for example, right now, it's not very cold weather conditions outside. So in the house, it's only by the broiler heating themselves, the rest of the house up, it's still 20 degrees centigrade. And a lot of broilers are outside the brooders. But for example, if you have the same situation with only -5 degrees during winter, maybe you see only 100 or a few hundred birds. And because they grow older and they become fully feathered after a few weeks, then they are going much more outside, and even more outside the brooders than inside, and using, for example, our straw bales, so they can play with. You can see they are picking on it. They use it as a foraging material. And they use much more the platforms which are located in the house. And platforms, it's not because they only like to sit at a higher level, so they can have an overview, but we also spread straw on the platforms. They have a different type of floor, a different type of flooring, different foraging material, so they can play and choose where they like to sit, and that's very important. And also these platforms give a little bit shade in a fully daylight area, so they can choose whatever they like to sit in terms of daylight. We try, as I said before, to copy as much as we can the natural behavior in nature. For example, the brooders as a mother hen, but also we do it over here. We spread some weeds so they can scratch on the floor looking for their own feed, which is very important, which is also one of the requirements of the Better Life label. Using these platforms, you can see they are using them much more when they become older. Now there are only a few birds located on the platforms, and usually from 2-3 weeks, maybe I think it's 3 weeks, when they become more feathered, they like to use the platforms much more. In this house, we are producing, like I told before, we are keeping birds for the Better Life label. It's a slower growing brand, a Hubbard, which is one of the requirements. But we are also, it's also possible in this house to reduce your antibiotics level. For example, we started with this house and also the other houses for the Better Life label in 2015. And from of that, which is more than 5 years now, we didn't use any antibiotics anymore. So it helps. And I think in the Netherlands, the Better Life label, 99% of all the birds are not, there is no antibiotic use at all. So the slower growing combination of slower growing birds, slower growing feed, different feed, and more area, more space can help to reduce antibiotic usage. We talked about sustainability. So we talked about reducing antibiotic use, more animal welfare because they have lots of more space. One of the requirements in this house is 25 kilograms max per square meter. We talked about reducing energy consumption by 75%. So it sounds like it's all hallelujah. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. One of our focus right now is because we are having much more days for the birds to grow to reach the 2.5 kilogram. You see, we need more feed. And one of the challenges right now is because if you need more feed for 1 kilogram meat, it's not more sustainable in point of view of energy and feed usage. So we try to reduce right now the feed usage by looking for local sources of protein and change the diet of the birds so we can improve sustainability in terms of carbon dioxide footprint of the feed production. But it's still a focus for us. It's a challenge to scale it up. From off here, we can see the birds looking now, and at this moment they are quite, I would say, almost sleepy. And it's very nice to see in this house that birds are like to behave their behavior like a group. And for example, now a lot of birds are resting, some are eating, and if you look right now over there, birds are running, and they like to do it with a few broilers together. And I think one of the main benefits of this house is that they have much better circumstances to improve and to follow their natural instincts to do their own behavior. And I think it's very important. So I can tell a lot more about this house, about how it works and the difference between the traditional houses we rebuilt from traditional farming to slow growing. But I think for now, time's up. So maybe it's time for some question and answering.
Well, thank you so much, Robert, for this live tour and for your enthusiasm. And I would like to thank all speakers for their engaging presentations. It is now time to open the panel discussion, but not before I introduce two more of our scientists who didn't have presentation, but they are here with us to answer some questions. They are Mark Brakke and Marien Gerritsen from the Wageningen University and Research. Marien Gerritsen we already heard before. He's a senior scientist at the Wageningen University and Research Center, and he has been working since 1997 in the field of animal welfare during animal transport, stunning and slaughter. He is the first author and co-author of considerable number of scientific papers in the field of animal welfare and stress psychology. Stress physiology, sorry for that. He is a member of several advisory boards and expert groups on animal transport, stunning and killing, including the Dutch Ministry, the OIA and EFSA. And Mark Brakke, he studied veterinary medicine, philosophy and applied ethology. As an animal welfare scientist at Wageningen Livestock Research, he authored more than 60 scientific peer-reviewed publications on the welfare of many farmed animal species, including pigs, poultry, cattle, and Atlantic salmon. His research is now focusing on the relationship between circular agriculture and animal welfare and as elements of sustainable farming. So they are also available for questions in this panel discussion. I would kindly ask all panelists to stay within the 5 minutes with your replies, as we want to answer as many questions as possible, also from the floor. But before we open the panel discussion, I would like to start with one question, a question to let me see. I think I have I lost my question here. I have a question for Professor Nicole. And you spoke about in your presentation about positive emotions and positive behavior of broiler chicken. And I was wondering if you could give us some examples of these positive behaviors that chickens may show to us, because I think not all of these behaviors are and emotions are recognizable for lay people like I am.
Oh yes, Thank you for that question. Yes, it's easy to talk about positive emotions and assume that everybody knows what we're talking about, but actually it is quite a complicated question because it's not clear that birds share exactly the same emotions as mammals. So mammals, humans and other mammals tend to share emotions that some people have given names to. But birds have a slightly different set, I think. And chickens in particular, I think their strongest emotions, it's quite easy to name the negative ones. So fearfulness, pain, these are conscious states that matter to the birds. When we think about the positive ones, it is slightly harder. A good example though, Ingrid mentioned play. Play is a positive emotion in mammals. Chickens, though, show a sort of slightly restricted set of play. They play with objects when they're very young and they do a little bit of locomotor play. So we saw them on the farm just now, that running together in a group. But they're much less likely, there's no real evidence that they engage in social play. So we need to think carefully about what we do mean by positive emotions. But there's no doubt that chickens have a very strong emotional system that's related to exploration and foraging. So that system in mammals is called the seeking system, and the brain structures are very similar in birds. And chickens have a very strong, they do get pleasure from foraging, uncovering new items, playing with the straw, pulling the straw out, foraging in the straw, and dust bathing is a similar example. So there is a set of positive emotions. We know that the birds experience what we call positive valence. They choose those situations over other situations. And we can look at the brain structures and see similarities with ourselves and mammals. But birds are not the same as us, and they have a different set. And we need to remember that as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Very useful answer. Reineke, over to you, because you probably have a lot of questions for our panelists.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, we have loads of questions. So let us get started. Firstly, we would like to go back to the windstreek and see if Robert is still there. Robert, can you hear me?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, we have some questions for you, for starters. Robert, some people wonder, is your business model, is it profitable? Because someone is saying that it's not the farmers who are blocking this transition, it's the consumers who are just used to cheap chicken meat. So is your business profitable? Can you say anything about that?
Yeah, I would almost say, of course, it's profitable. Otherwise, I wouldn't be a farmer anymore after 5 years. But it's especially the Better Life label pays off for the extra investments you do, not only in terms of more square meters, but also for the straw use, the different type of feed, the different breed you use. So I think if I compare it to traditional farming, it's almost equal. So yes, it is profitable. And it also helps for me the reducing in energy consumption. And what I said, we are still looking for local sources for protein, and not only in reducing carbon dioxide footprint, but also from the point of view in maybe we can do it a little bit cheaper as we do it with the traditional soy in the diets, for example. So yeah, it's profitable. And there was another question you mentioned.
Well, this also relates to the question about environmental issues and animal welfare, because as you said during the tour you gave us, is that the feed conversion of slower growing breeds is higher, which is normal, of course. So how do you look at that trade-off? And also, do you think that there would be more innovative solutions to tackle this problem? For example, to use leftover streams or co-products to really make sure that this balance is better between the environmental issues and animal welfare?
Yeah, yeah, we still have focus on the diet. It's correct that we use more feed to produce a kilogram of bird meat because of they are living longer. We are looking for different types of feed ingredients. So it could be leftovers, but there's also a lot of risk with hygienic status of leftovers. And if you compare it, for example, to pigs, they are used to have liquid feed, and chickens, we are not used to feed them liquid. So that makes, I think, a difference. But we are still focusing on that because we know sustainability is not only animal welfare or not only energy consumption reduce. So we try to focus on that. But I like to say a few words also for the consumers. Everybody says consumers are always picking up the cheapest meat, and sometimes they do. But I think a lot of consumers like to pay more, but a lot of consumers don't even know that we do have different houses. And because, in my opinion, especially in the retail, we sometimes we need more exposure of telling what we are doing as farmers. We do have a lot of ideas, but when supermarkets, retailers do not tell our story and not give us exposure what we are doing, consumers don't know what's happening over there, and they still, because they are confused or they don't know, still buy the cheapest meat or the only thing they know, for example, organic or something in between. And I think that's what, for example, the Dierenbescherming in the Netherlands did a good job with their easy and simple Better Life label. Every consumer understands the system. And I think if we get more exposure in, we are improving and invent a lot of new things in farming as farmers, I think it would help to let consumers make a better decision.
Absolutely, you have a very good point there, and this is a hot topic in the EU now, how to improve labeling, not only marketing labels, but maybe also look at a mandatory method of production labeling to ensure that the farmers get a fair price, but also that there is much more transparency towards consumers. One last question for you, Robert. There are also some comments about on-farm hatching. Do you have any opinion about that? Because we also know that there is a lot of suffering going on during the hatching phase that may need addressing.
Yeah, I'm using, because we made some agreements with my hatchery and the slaughter company and the retailer, and we are using, I think now for 3 years, on hatch feeding and watering. So when they come out of the egg, before they come out of the egg, the eggs are located in trays, in boxes, where they have access to feed and to water. And the other thing you can choose for is on-farm hatching. But because my hatchery and slaughter company choose for this system, easy to say, I don't have a choice. But I think it's a good, it's quite equal to on-hatch farming, hatching, I mean, or feeding and watering in the hatchery. So we have focus on that. And I think if you want to do it, because it costs more money, you like to do it in an economic, on an economic scale, you have to choose to one of those two options. And our meat chain choose for the option of feeding and watering during hatching.
Good, thank you for that, Robert. There was one last question, which I think is interesting and it can be very quick. Someone is asking, why are the platforms so high? Do you not have problems with fractures like in the layers in aviaries?
No, we did some trials, I think 10, 15 years ago with Wageningen University, and the level to the platforms are so high because they like to walk upstairs. It's no problem if you have half a meter or 1.5 meters. But we choose for this level because if you want to have enough ventilation under the platforms, we discovered you need at least 90 centimeters or a meter. And also in terms of controlling and having equal circumstances under the platforms, it's necessary to have this height. And broilers like to walk up. And if, for example, if you come back and you see these broilers in a few weeks, you will see almost all the platforms are covered with birds. So, and sometimes they're playing, but they don't have any fractures at all, and totally not from falling off the platforms or jumping off. That's no problem.
All right, thanks so much, Robert. We may come back to you towards the end if there's still time left, because it's raining questions for you here. But I would also like to ask some questions to the other experts. So let us move to Dr. Brakke. Mark, the report we launched today makes a strong case that if we were to continue rearing broiler chickens, the breeds should be slower growing, and the rearing systems of the future should look at much more different ways of doing that, having the interest of the animal at the center. And in your contribution to the report, you talk about integrity and ethics as applied to the poultry sector. Could you elaborate a bit about that? Because this may be very abstract to some people.
Sure, I'd be happy to actually. I was wondering about what would be the most important requirement for animal welfare. It also relates to the question you asked earlier and Francesco's and Niels's question, I think, to some extent, this point about integrity, because from a scientific point of view, there is not really a single most important welfare need to guarantee an adequate quality of life for the animals. But when I look at the causal factors behind welfare problems, then I think human integrity may be a very important requirement. I'm from Holland, small country. Nevertheless, we are the second largest exporter of agricultural products in the world after the United States, and we kill 1.7 million land animals for food every single day. That's 10% of our human population. And our cows burping methane, and our meadow birds are dwindling. We have nitrogen crisis. But when it's suggested that we should keep fewer animals, then our farmers get on their tractors to go and protest. And they say, we are the most sustainable in the world. Our welfare is the best, and they are proud of what they are doing. Now, I'm also on Twitter, and our livestock debate is heavily polarized. It's just like the United States almost at the moment. And polarization means that integrity has been sacrificed some way or another. And I think the Green Deal or the farm to fork strategy can bring sustainable farming or improved welfare only if we satisfy this criterion. If we secure integrity, defined as always being open and honest, not only when it serves our interest, but especially also when it does not serve our interests. I think being open and honest is important for decision making, because we just have to be informed properly. And integrity, in my view, implies two things regarding sustainability. And one is that we must bring sustainability, that we must bring production and consumption within the carrying capacity of the planet. And secondly, it implies that we must bring production and consumption within the carrying capacity of all people and animals that are involved in production. So we should never treat individuals in a way that overtaxes their control system, in a way that we would never want to be treated ourselves. That means that we have to preserve animal integrity, that we have to make sure that we let animals live within the limits of their natural adaptations. And the more human integrity we have, the more we are open and honest, I think the more we can bring a truly sustainable farming future and build it together. As far as I'm concerned, that must include improved animal welfare and also improved farmer welfare. On the other hand, I also know that integrity will not come naturally. We will have to foster it and cultivate it. So human integrity, being open and honest, I think has to be part of the Green Deal or the farm to fork strategy. I think it's very important. And if we do not manage to protect it, I think it will be very difficult to find a sustainable future.
Thank you, Mark. And this is really strong what you are saying. I'm following your Twitter account with great interest, but sometimes also I'm very puzzled why there is such a strong sort of polarization between the status quo and the people who want to move forward. So can you share a bit more about why you believe this is happening? Why do we see such a strong reaction at the moment? Is this part of, you know, the change process, this friction? Or do you think indeed that if we start a discussion about integrity and openness, as you just said, that we can overcome that and that we should overcome this?
Well, I think integrity means that you're open, and open means also that you're open to the possibility that your own views may not be the right ones. So by definition, it means that you cannot have polarization if you allow for the fact that you may see things wrongly. And that gives an opening for a debate. I think people have their interests and they will try to find facts that support their interests. And that's what we see in polarization and debate about livestock farming. It can be very extreme, from veganists who want to get rid of all domestic animals in society. And it can go the other way around. Farmers saying, well, we are a very sustainable and more intensive farming will protect nature and we need to save the planet and we need to feed the world. And they're both true to some extent. And also hiding part or not wanting to see part of reality. We know, of course, that consumers have suffered from, I would almost say, cognitive dissonance. They want to eat meat, but they do not want to wait to know how meat is being produced. And integrity also solves that problem. I think you should be open and honest and be able to say, to account for what you do and the decisions you make. But at the same time, being open and honest in our current society will put you at a disadvantage. You get taken advantage of, basically. So if we manage to secure it in kind of legislation and make it necessary for people in the market to be open and honest, so to say what is good about their product, but not to hide the things that they know are not good about their product, then we can move, I think, much faster together towards a sustainable future, because we will have to understand each other, and if we understand how important it is to be open and honest, especially about animal welfare, and that the knowledge the farmer has about welfare gets to the consumers that can make their own feeding habit decisions, their moral decisions, and it can get to the politicians that have to make decisions at the society level. So a good being properly informed, I think, is essential. Mm-hmm. I think, on the other hand, I think if you're not properly informing, if you're lobbying and only arguing for your interests and presenting only one side of the picture, I think we should strongly discourage that practice. It's very normal. We think it's normal, but it's not good for sustainability.
Thank you so much, Mark, also for bringing this highly relevant perspective to the table, which is not often discussed. I would have loved to talk a bit more about this, but we still have some questions to the other experts. Thank you, Mark. The next question is for Professor O'Connell. Professor O'Connell, we sometimes hear that farmers in warmer climates may struggle to maintain house temperatures if they provide access to natural light, because clearly it can be a lot hotter there. Could you respond to this concern?
Yes, it's a concern that I have heard raised before previously. And I think certainly we are all dealing with more extremes in temperatures at both ends of the extreme and having to manage that within commercial houses. In relation to the heat issue, I think that is a valid concern that we need to understand better. Certainly within the houses, appropriate use of shutters and of overhangs on the roof can help to address some issues, but I think potentially we also need to look into the type of glass we're using, and potentially the tilting of the windows to help minimize heat buildup within the house. So I don't think these issues are insurmountable, but I certainly think we need quite a bit of applied research to understand best how to manage windowed houses within hotter climates. I've done some work in collaboration with scientists in Brazil, and I know they're looking into the use of solar tubes as ways to introduce natural light into houses without creating overheating problems. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, very good. Thank you so much, Professor O'Connell, because this will become an increasing problem not only in the south of Europe, but because of climate change, I think also in other parts of the world. So we have another question for Dr. Gerritsen. I can't see you, but I'm sure you are still with us. You may know that the EU is planning to revise the transport regulation. And clearly we still have to await the process of the fitness check and the decisions about what legislation are going to be revised. But what are the sort of key aspects you believe that need to be improved in terms of broiler chicken transport? And perhaps you can also say a few words about the catching of the birds. I also saw some questions about that in the Q&A.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure in what direction the change of the regulation or the scientific opinions will go, of course, because they are just starting at the moment. But a major animal welfare issue during transport starts with the catching and the injuries of birds. So reducing injuries due to catching and crating is one of the most relevant issues in animal transport, because when you are injured, like you have broken or dislocated wing or leg, you have to go on animal transport, that is a serious welfare issue. Another thing is due to climate change and having more hot days in different countries, heat stress during transport, especially during stops during transport, when the vehicle is stationary at a parking space or at the slot, but will increase heat stress and will increase death on arrivals, and is a very serious animal welfare issue. So I think temperature control and fitness for transport will be important issues for animal transport. And I think that is more important than the duration of transport, because I think that the fitness of the bird and the circumstances of during transport are more important than the length of the transport by itself. So that's on transport. Were there other questions on this?
Thank you for sharing that with us. Could you elaborate a bit on catching methods? I think that, you know, we have seen a lot of issues there. Where do you see the room for improvement on that?
That's quite difficult, because there are more systems of catching animals, and some research point out that automated catching with machines is better for animal welfare because it gives less injuries. But there are also research developments that in which we saw more injuries with automated systems. So it comes all down how you work with the systems, how you handle birds manually, how many birds you are catching in one go, but also with automated catching and loading of animals. It all depends on how people work with the system. So if you have an automatic system that is not well adjusted to the birds or to the situation, you can destroy a lot of the benefits. So I cannot say this system is better than the other system. Of course, it is better if you take one bird at each time and bring them to a container and place them in gently. But you also have to deal with how long it will take to empty a farm. So there are limitations to what you can do. But the main interest will go to I think, to the human aspect of the human-animal interaction.
Thanks for that, Dr. Gerritsen. For everyone who would like to know more about transport, slaughter, but also hatching, I refer to the report because there is a lot more in there. I would like to go back to Dr. de Jong. I see in the chat that there's a lot of debate about the profitability of middle segment, but maybe also higher segment broiler farming, and what is needed to make that reality. Some people really wonder if this is feasible. Do you have an opinion about that, Dr. de Jong?
Yeah, as I said in my presentation, of course, costs are involved when you move from our very efficient systems to systems that are working with lower stocking density or slower growing breeds, or etc. So in any way, there should be a higher price for the farmer, higher market prices, because otherwise it will not become feasible at all. I'm not an economist.
Yeah.
But so that's I think I should keep my answer a bit limited, but I think we also do have examples. For example, from the Netherlands, where the fresh meat sold in retail is from so-called middle segment systems. So there are opportunities for change, and of course this is not very easy, but yeah, it might be a good example of how it can be done.
Yeah, and do you agree with Professor Nicole with the analysis that increasing the proportion of higher welfare systems should go in hand with also an increase of plant-based diets, also to sort of mitigate the aspect of the environmental issues?
Yeah, that's it's like Professor Nicole said, we always feel a bit uncomfortable about this question, because it's our expertise is welfare, and these questions of course go further than that. But yeah, there are a lot of developments, I think. So yeah, maybe in the future we will have a kind of a shift in different, where you have a kind of animal protein produced from broilers in higher welfare systems next to more use of plant-based protein, for example. But this is not really my field of research, so it's really difficult to answer these type of questions, I must say.
Yes, I can understand, of course. It's also logical that these questions come up because we are really thinking about how to make this happen. So I would like to go back to Professor O'Connell, please. We have a question about using the platforms as enrichment, because these are being used more and more in broiler and also pellet rearing. And some official vet inspectors are raising the issue of the feces percolating on the birds below. Do you have an opinion about how that can be avoided?
It's not an issue that we have come across in our research. So we've done a lot of research with platform perches on commercial farms, but that could relate to the way in which we present the platforms. So in order to help the birds use them, they tend to be quite low at the start to allow the small chicks to get onto them. And then as the chicks grow, the perches are also raised in step with that. So it's only really towards the third or fourth week that they're up at the highest level, which would permit other birds to go underneath them. So that problem in terms of issues underneath the perch hasn't really arisen. So I think certainly the way in which perches are presented and potentially in the material in which they're made from could help to alleviate some of those problems.
Thanks a lot for sharing that with us. There's another question you may be able to answer, and that is about, do you think that the improved housing facilities also present more problems in terms of aggressive behavior?
Aggressive behavior with broilers from my experience, isn't really a big problem with these types of birds. Certainly, we haven't seen in any of our research over the last 10 years any increase in aggressive behavior when they're provided with more enriched environments. I don't see that as being a problem.
Okay, thanks for that. Robert, are you still with us? Because maybe you could also come in and share with us your experience. Do you witness more aggressive behavior?
No, it's not more aggressive behavior, but in the house, because of all the daylight, we experienced more behavior. For example, sunbathing, dust bathing, but also the usual behavior of playing with each other, and like all the young animals do. Um, and we see an increasing activity of the birds, but not in being aggressively or picking each other or something. No, it can occur. I heard from some colleagues it still can happen even with slow growing broilers, but I think it's more a nutritional problem, or but it doesn't. It's not linked to daylight or not, so it doesn't make sense, and it's also not. I think it's not linked to birds per square meter, to density or something. No, and I didn't experience it myself.
Okay, and some people are also asking Robert, is it a problem with catching the birds that they are more active, and what is your best approach to catching the birds?
Best approach is what we discovered is you have to catch them during night, and usually you do it also in dark times with traditional broilers. But because of all the daylight, we like to have a big contrast between the daylight and the dark between the night. So we have full daylight, and when it's a little bit dark outside, we use artificial light, especially the last week, to light up and to make a big difference. And we do that. Then it's dark during the night hours, and it's 8 hours dark. And when the contrast is high, birds are very quiet. They are resting, so they are sitting and resting on the floor, and it's easily to pick them up. And I don't think it's difficult or a lot of difference between traditional broilers and slower growing broilers. I didn't experience it, but it helps if you are worried about it, to make a big contrast. And that's what this house can help a lot. You have a lot of daylight during day, so they are resting and are very quiet during night.
Good. This is really interesting to hear your firsthand experience. The last question for you, Robert, you may have heard that we also touched upon the rise of plant-based alternatives. From a farmer's perspective, is that an issue for you?
I didn't understand the first part.
Okay, so we are witnessing in our society also an increased consumption of plant-based alternatives, so vegetarian or vegan alternatives. Is that a problem for you as a farmer?
No, not at all. But I always have two questions for that. The first one is, if you use plant-based material, for example, soy drinks or soy as a protein, then you come in a discussion which is more sustainable in producing the whole producing system to broiler meat or to the plant-based other alternatives. And the second question for me is, I think it's a good thing if people are aware of what they are doing and what they are eating. And I think if they beware of the fact they are eating meat and they know where it comes from and how it's to say, I hate the word to say, how it's produced, then it helps a lot in be aware of what you're eating. And if they, in that case, make the decision to do it plant-based or not, it's their own decision, and they have thought about it. And I think that's very important. A lot of decisions are now made of not knowing all the information about how it's produced, how it's grown, how it works. And that's, I think that will help me. And it's not the discussion. I'm not sad if people do not like to eat a lot of meat or don't eat meat at all. It's about beware of the facts, how it works in nature and how it's produced. I think that's very important.
Thanks so much, Robert. And your message is very clear. We also really need to invest in more transparency. I would like to, for consumers, I would like to ask a last question linked to this to you, Mark, also from the floor. There's a lot of debate about is chicken meat too cheap? And why do consumers keep buying it? And what needs to happen to change that? Because clearly, if we want to start this transition process, we also need to work on a better price. How do you look at that, Mark?
Yeah, I'm afraid I come back to this keyword of integrity. Though I would also like to bring up another point, that is, if it comes to animal welfare, then especially in relation to sustainability, it is something that people think, well, they're not even sure that it's part of sustainability because it's mainly environment driven. But when you look at it from an animal welfare model or point of view, then, well, actually, as a scientist, I must say, people are animals too. So animal welfare, if you look at it from the whole group, then it's the welfare about human and non-human animals. And then questions about economy, for example, are human welfare interests, human welfare needs, and they essentially have to be weighed against animal welfare needs. And the bottom line is the golden rule, as far as I'm concerned. You have to think about, if you think about what Marine was saying about this one broiler that gets a broken wing and is put on transport, can you justify to yourself that if somebody else would do that to you, would that be okay? And if you could say that should never be done to me, how can you then do that to the bird? That's ultimately the question you have to answer if you're open and honest. So if you force integrity, that's the problem you're going to face.
Thank you so much. And on that philosophical note, and there's also a strong plea for respecting animals as individuals and sentient creatures, I would like to hand back to you, Anja, for your closing remarks. Thanks to all panelists, and thank you to a great audience for posting so many questions. I apologize we were not able to answer them all, but we have done our best to answer most of them in the Q&A. Anja, back to you.
Yes, thank you, Reineke. It's almost a pity to go to the closing remarks after such an inspiring debate and a lot of interesting answers and questions. But I have to. We all have to close this meeting in a few minutes. I'd like to thank you all for having attended this Intergroup webinar. We hope you found it inspiring, and we are looking forward to working on better lives for broiler chickens. Before you leave, I would like to make a few announcements. The first one is that I think we are all very worried about the spreading of mutated forms of SARS coronavirus 2 among farmed American minks, and minks which are kept in crowded conditions, ideal for spreading the virus, have been infected on a large scale in Denmark and the Netherlands, but also animals were infected in Italy, in Spain, in Sweden, and some of the United States, with devastating consequences. And last week, I sent out a letter with vice presidents of this intergroup to Commissioner Stella Kyriakides, in which we requested to permanently close all mink farms in the EU. And on the 8th of December, the Humane Society International and Fur Free Alliance will be organizing a webinar hosted by myself, Niels Fuglsang, and Anna de Parne-Groenenberg, in which we will address the animal welfare and public health concerns around fur farming in Europe. The next session of this animal welfare intergroup will take place on the 9th of December, As always, we will send an invitation in due course. I just want to say, stay safe, everyone. Thanks again to all experts, panelists, colleagues, and the Secretariat of the Intergroup for contributing to our meeting today. I just want to say bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye.